Anyone got fruit trees in the garden at the moment? Apple trees? Yeah? Apple trees?
Very little.
Well, it was been a poor year. Well, it's been a mixed year, I suppose, for them, but certainly the apples are small this year.
Yeah.
And I was talking to some of the growers of the apples. The price of apples has gone up. It's doubled or trebled this year because there's a shortage of them. What you should be doing at this time of year is pruning them back. Now, the reason that there's so little fruit this year is because we had a great flowering season, which is important. So the trees flower their heads off. They're absolutely brilliant. And I was predicting we'd have a bumper crop of apples this year. But April was very cold and the bees weren't really out. So pollination was way down. And also with the amount of rainfall we had this year, there's a lot of disease problems around this year. But the one thing you could do is prune the apple trees. Now is the time coming in, as soon as they start to drop their leaves. So over the next 3 to 4 weeks, you could be cutting them back. And it's important, particularly with young trees, that you prune them to get a nice shape on them. So all you do, if you're buying this tree, what I would recommend is you take it and you cut all the branches back like that. And the reason you do that, the reason we prune plants back is from that one cutting, you end up with 2 new shoots. So a new shoot will come from there and another one from this bud here. So next year, if that has 6 stems on it, it'll have 12.
And is this time of year to be planting out a tree like that?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, autumn is always the traditional planting time. Like if you think about it, nature itself is sowing its own seed at this time of year.
It's falling off the trees.
Yeah. So, and the reason that it's a good time to plant is that the soil temperature, the air temperature varies. So we're probably 14 degrees today. And, you know, in a week's time it might be down to 10 degrees. And by December it'll be 5 degrees during the day. But the soil temperature stays pretty constant winter, spring and summer and autumn. Except maybe in a year that we had, you know, the very exceptional crop. So soil temperature stays the same. So the roots of plants actually continue to grow through the winter. So if you plant a plant now, by March or April of next year, as it's coming into leaf, the roots will have trebled. So it has a better foundation and a better structure. Same if you're putting in hedging plants, even though they're not physically growing upwards, they're actually rooting. Same if you planted bulbs, daffodil bulbs now, lift them in 4 or 5 weeks' time, there'll be a mass of white roots on them. So the roots of plants grow during the winter period. So it is a very good time to plant. Now, and traditionally before we copped on to pots, it was the time that everything was planted. So, you know, the dormant season, which is from the middle of October through till about the middle of March. That was, and after that we used to plant. But then that's really, I suppose, what pots have allowed us to do, is plant all year round. But it is still better to plant in the autumn. So again, and that applies to flowering trees, hedging plants, fruit trees, shrubs in general. Autumn's a good time to plant. So if you're putting in plants, certainly prune them back. The purpose of pruning them is really to encourage double branching and treble branching. So you're multiplying the number of stems of fruit you're going to get. And it's important in the first number of years to develop the shape of the tree.
So you would top that?
We would chop it all back, all the side shoots. I would cut these. Now this one actually got a bit of a clipping. This, you'll see if you look at it closely, it was probably cut back a month ago. You see here, it was cut back, you see the cut point there, and you can see the 2 new shoots. But I would still just tip it back if I was planting it today, because from those 2 shoots I'll have 4 next year. It'll be by April of next year. And really for the first couple of years we don't concentrate on the fruiting, we try to let the tree develop its shape, and then it will start to fruit. And that would apply from things like pears, apples, blackcurrants, gooseberries that I mentioned there. We're coming up to the time of year for cutting all of those back. Alright, so that's what happens in the fruit garden. If you have a greenhouse or tunnel, a couple of fruiting plants you could consider would be grapes, which grow very well, they grow exceptionally well here. They don't need any heat, but just the protection of the tunnel. Peaches, nectarines do very well. Strawberries would be good to bring in maybe in February, you know, so you leave them out for the winter, then take them in the spring, and they do very well in the tunnel. And all the veg plants I mentioned. Alright, somebody asked me about bulbs. So, you bring me over. Again, if you were getting a blackcurrant like that, that's again about a 2-year-old plant from a cutting like I've shown you there. You would again cut it back. You tip it back to somewhere like, you know, like that bud there. And the pieces could be used as cuttings if you wish.
Even if they're still in fruit, our blackcurrants are still in fruit, would you cut it back?
Yeah, the fruit should be. I'm surprised the birds haven't picked them. Yeah, well, the thing is, you should be picking the fruit because it's. But yeah, from now on, and it's you could wait until the leaves have fallen. To be honest, which would be another 2 weeks,
Right.
and it's easier to see the plant.
Yeah.
But if I was planting it in the garden, I would tip it back because you won't have any fruit in it anyway as a young plant. But you're coming up, and certainly within 2 weeks, you'll be cutting your blackcurrants back, and those shoots you can use as now. If you're pruning, how old are they?
10 years old.
Right. Well, so don't
Well
just
established.
yeah. Well, don't prune them like a rose bush. Don't cut them back to nothing.
Yeah.
What you need to do is, and actually it'd be a good time to do it. What I would actually do in your case is take out all the shoots that actually have fruit on them.
Right.
So go in with, even do it over the weekend if you want. So take the fruit, you're able to cut the stem, harvest the fruit, but you're taking out the old wood because blackcurrants fruit on 2-year-old wood. So that shoot that I took off the blackcurrants at home have no fruit on them this year because it's this year's growth, and it's that light tanny colour. On the older wood it'll be darker and you'll have fruit on it. So it'll actually be a very easy way for you to, so all you do is go around and take out the shoots that have fruit on them, and those that don't, just leave them alone. Because this is where the fruit will be born next year. And that you should do that every 3 years. You're kind of renovating the plant that you've taken out. Over 3 years you've taken out all the shoots. So you don't treat it like a rose bush, you just selectively take out the shoots that have fruited.
Our raspberries were only coming out now.
Well, there's a variety called Autumn Bliss now.
Might be.
To be honest, you normally pick the fruit about the first week of September.
We had a harvest in May,
Right.
early May, and then nothing at all the whole year, and now they started fruiting again.
Well, there's two types, and you might have mixed some mixed canes there.
Yeah.
So there are varieties, the Malling family, which fruit in May and June. They're summer fruiting varieties, and then there are varieties that flower or fruit in the autumn. So September. So now, and you prune them both differently, slightly differently too. Yeah. So the autumn fruiting ones, those that are fruiting them at the moment, you cut them literally to nothing,
Right.
put them back to the ground. And those that flowered in the summer, you do like with the blackcurrants, you just take out the shoots that flower. So any short shoots on this, leave them well enough alone, and anything with fruit on them at the moment, you can cut them right back to nothing. All right. So so in terms of bulbs, if you're planting bulbs, again, this is the time of year for daffodils, tulips, all the spring flowering bulbs. Really, they're dead easy to grow. Even if you plant them upside down, they'll actually grow back up again. The couple of points with bulbs is to plant them at least twice the depth. So if they're 2 or 3 inches high, you're putting them down about 6 inches deep. Plant them in clusters. So generally a minimum of 5 to 7 in cluster. Remember that you can plant them in pots, no problem whatsoever, and transplant them out then as they're coming into flower in April for a bit of colour. Dwarf tulips and dwarf narcissi, they're ideal for tubs and containers, hanging baskets, anywhere like that. But they're foolproof because really what you're buying is a 3-year-old bulb. So actually, if you were to dissect it, the flower embryo is formed already. So if you set it up on just something with water, it would actually come into flower and leaf. So they're that simple to grow. And there's a wide range of bulbs available. You could, if you get offsets like that, you could take some of them off if you wanted and transplant them. But generally they're left as a cluster.
That's your automatic cluster. That's your bulb.
Yeah. And bulbs will from those 3 they'll produce another 3. So over time they actually start to spread and form thicker clumps, which can be lifted, divided, and transplanted somewhere else. But you could, if you wanted, you can propagate them that way as well. Now the likes of those offsets won't possibly flower, and this one will this year. But that can be done with them. And they're all winter hardy, so you leave them out. But planting them now, within 4 weeks, 5 weeks, the root structure will have, it'll be as big as my hand. So they actually grow very, very, very quickly. The other thing I mentioned on the radio the last number of weeks was the weed control around the garden. There's a lot of weeds around, knocking around, so it would be a good idea to control weeds before the seed drops. And weed control at this time of year, you tend to get a very good kill. So you were talking to me about the brambles.
Yeah.
Treating them now at this time of year actually knocks them back better than treating them in the springtime.
When they're dead, when it's gone dark coloured, the actual plant itself, do you cut it back?
You can
Or-
do. You could just trim it back if you wish, just to
Just
tidy
let
it
it-
up.
yeah.
But say if it's scotch grass or docks or whatever,
Yeah.
they'll just rot back into the soil. So there's no need to. But if it's a bramble, yeah, you know, you'll have the old strands there. So it's a good idea to chop them and put them dump them somewhere. But any of the other weeds will just die back naturally if you use a systemic weed killer. The other big thing that people are asking us about is moss control, particularly on again it's just down to the very wet summer. So moss on slates, tiles, paving, all of that, the Patio Magic you'll find very effective. Moss on your lawn, you'll need to use something like the sulphate of iron. And if that's mixed, the easiest way I find is to mix it in a spraying machine and literally just spray it onto the lawn. And it doesn't matter about the weather. Well, preferably not too windy, because if it blows onto your tarmac atom, it'll leave a stain. But apart from that, if it rains, it doesn't make any difference. It works very effectively. So sulphate of iron this time of year, generally people come in the spring and they're asking about moss. And the simple reason it'll grow all winter if you don't treat it now. So treat it now with sulphate of iron, it'll kill it within 2 days. Give the lawn a bit of a feed, an autumn feed, and that's all it's going to need for the winter. But moss is very problematic at the moment with just the high level of rainfall. The other thing that people have mentioned to us is nostoc, which is a slimy type of jelly substance on pathways and driveways. That again, something like Patio Magic will get rid of it. But it's really just down to the very wet season we had this year. There's no other problem really. But what you'd be using are any of the winter hardy stuff, so cyclamen. So if you're doing, say, a window box, and it's full of summer bedding, the best thing is just to dump everything out because the compost will be spent. Fill it up with new compost. I'd put a line of bulbs in the bottom. So if that's your container, put some compost in, put your bulbs in first. So window box that length, you might use a dozen Red Riding Hood tulips, which only grow that height. And then fill up the rest with compost. And then you'd use plants like the primulas, which are just coming into flower, cyclamen, which will flower right through the winter, winter heathers, winter pansies, violas. So there's a range of plants that are winter hardy, give you colour the whole season long, and then the bulbs will continue to grow. So in February you'll see the leaves of the, say, Red Riding Hood tulip coming through, and then the flowers will come right up. Even if you put a viola sitting right on top of it, the bulb will still come through. So there's no problem. So winter heathers, winter pansies, winter violas, they'll flower up till about May of next year from now. The polyanthus, the cyclamen, trailing ivies, they're the sort of plants that people will be using in containers. A bit of colour, or even some of the shrubs for burying shrubs that would have a nice bit of foliage colour, and use some of the flowering plants around them. Would be a good idea. And then all of those, like the bulbs, once they go out of flower in April, you can put them back in the garden. You don't throw them out. You can reuse them in the garden, plant them in the garden. Or like the bulbs are great because you can simply just, if you're having a spot for them at the moment, just put 6 or 7 in a pot, leave them outside for the winter. You'll see them growing then in January and February, and then if you want to put them in a particular area of the garden, it's very easy, just slot them in. They'll come out of the pots. You don't have to keep them inside at all, just leave them out as if they're planted in the ground. You don't have to wash them, just leave them alone. So once they're potted up. Or you can bring some of them in, say in January, into the house and force them on. Fool them into thinking that spring has arrived and they come into flower. So you can do that with them as well.